Greetings, welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, be it Kerwin Dubois in 2015 or Chaka Khan and Rufus in 1975, we understand the importance of circles. Now, if you did not hear about it, an Emotional Emancipation Circle is about to begin. Now, it could be the thing that transforms your lived experience. Trained EEC Facilitator Sean Samad, he joins us to share more on dates and times after we discuss the potential impact on your life. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Samad. Let us start from the ground up. Thank you. Define emotional emancipation circles.
So, as you rightfully mentioned, and thank you for having me, TK, as you rightfully mentioned, circles are a very culturally relevant kind of form, right? We do many things in circles, and circles for a long time have been significant for our people. Um, and so I want to start by talking about what is emotional emancipation, because the circles are really just about the format in which the thing happens, but what really is at the core of it is emotional emancipation. And emotional emancipation is really, according to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it's about psychological freedom, a firm sense of self-esteem. And so when we think about the lives of our ancestors, they were once, our African ancestors particularly, they were once enslaved in the Americas, and emancipation and physical freedom came in the mid 1800s. But up until today, people like ourselves who have African descent are still struggling with psychological and emotional emancipation. And so that's what's at the core of this program.
And if this term, emotional emancipation circles or EEC, is not necessarily the most common term or thing that we've heard about, what is it closest to in terms of things that we may hear about a little more readily?
Um, that's an interesting question. And so it was designed in the United States by the Association of Black Psychologists. And it really supports a lot of things that have been said in the past. So people like Marcus Garvey, for example, out of Jamaica, who talks about Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley, who talks about freeing yourself from mental slavery. The famous author Bell Hooks talked about, having a mass movement of really rethinking who we are and how we feel about things that had to be close to what she called Alcoholics Anonymous. So I don't wanna say it's parallel to Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's based on a similar kind of methodology, which is bringing people together who are sharing similar situations, who are sharing similar histories, who are sharing similar everyday challenges, and creating a safe space in order to explore those things and talk through those things.
And with that in mind, many times from what I've heard is with regard to Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the things is that you need to say, okay, well, this is an issue, this is a problem, this is my situation. With that though, who's the cohort that you're looking for? Who's meant to be part of this initiative that you're going to be having?
Yeah. So the target of it is really anybody of African descent. And why it's people of African descent is because, of course, we are all the products of things that happened in the Americas, in these spaces, that really kind of did a number on our ancestors. I mean, the first thing, the most obvious thing that we think about when we think about enslavement was the physical limitations, right? Not being allowed to just move and be yourself. But there were also a number of other kinds of limitations, cultural limitations, emotional limitations. We weren't allowed to keep our names, practice our religions, play our instruments. And so it's calling for a type of community healing. And so the people who this targets would be anybody of African descent, because we would all be affected by and shaped by these circumstances. So in summary, anybody who is curious about how did we come to this point, the traumas and the kinds of challenges that we continue to carry, and what are some of the things that we can do, some of the tools we can learn, the skills that we can adopt to help us move past this trauma and heal. ultimately.
Thank you so much for that. And this makes me want to go back to some of the conversations that we've had previously, in the sense that how does the Black Consciousness Festival tie into this? And so is it a matter of asking what the festival is, and how does this initiative further the work of the Black Consciousness Festival?
Right. So the Black Consciousness Festival really started as an initiative to promote a greater awareness, a greater understanding of all that it means to be a person of African descent, right? The practices that make us who we are, uniquely who we are culturally, the pride that needs to be developed and what it means to be a person of African descent, and of course the power that all of that carries. And this is tied in intimately because, of course, Black consciousness, the point of Black consciousness is that once we really understand who we truly are, that then kind of buttresses us and gives us the support that we need to do the kind of healing that I'm talking about that happens in emotional emancipation circles. Interestingly, emotional emancipation circles is based on a very simple premise, and that premise is that a lot of the things that challenge us, whether it's culturally, psychologically, emotionally, are the byproducts of a lie that threads through a lot of the things that exist in our societies. And that lie is that some racial and ethnic groups are superior to others. And that's at the root of many of the problems that we have. So emotional emancipation circles tackles that lie and seeks to reinstitute a truth, which is that we're all human beings, we all have cultural gifts, and we all have histories that make us who we are, that we need to come to terms with.
But I think I'll let that breathe for a moment and we take a short break. And when we come back, we continue the conversation. But we are speaking with Sean Samad, looking at emotional emancipation circles and an initiative that is going to be starting very shortly. I think actually on the 11th of March. So we continue the conversation when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking about emotional emancipation circles with trained facilitator Sean Samad, and looking at that role of being a trained facilitator. Sometimes when I speak with social workers, mental health workers, and people who are helping individuals get from one point to another, there's work that they need to do on themselves to be able to allow that to happen, almost kind of physician heal thyself. So what are some of the things that you would have needed to do and go through in order to prepare to guide people through this experience, Mr. Samad?
Right. So the first thing that I had to do was obviously go through an emotional emancipation circle myself that was led by the Community Healing Network, which is the organization that's like the body that promotes emotional emancipation circles. So I had to participate in one of these circles myself. And then coming out of that, they hosted a training session, a very intense training session for people who wanted to become facilitators. And I would have gone through that. I want to mention that in both the emotional emancipation circle that I attended, as well as the facilitator training, I was one of a handful of men. The majority of people that participated were women, which is a really interesting perspective about emotional emancipation. That I guess for many men, it's not something that seems appealing. Maybe the word emotional says to them that it's not for them, but it's for all of us, both men and women, especially for men.
And I wonder sometimes if when you use the word emotion, if you don't compartmentalize and put it away into a box, then you have to deal with it. And sometimes having to deal with one emotion from one situation, that can be the straw, because everything just piles up and you start to see everything at one point. So I wonder if that's part of it. Because even like we've had conversations previously, anger is not necessarily an initial response. It may be grief, it may be sadness, it may be fear, but it's easier to project, it's easier to articulate that, especially as a man. Affects are mad. and we do this, or we take this sort of action. So I'm wondering if that's part of it, but definitely something that bears looking into. But what's your take on it?
My take on it is it's very simple and connected to what you were just saying, that, as men, unfortunately, in the societies in which we're raised, we are not socialized to really process and understand emotions as vital and important and natural. It is a natural part of the human existence to have emotions and to find ways to process them and deal with them. We're taught that they are not a masculine thing, they are not a manly thing, and therefore it's not our job to process them. It's not acceptable to have to deal with them. Only certain emotions, as you mentioned, anger being one of them, are allowed or seen as being permitted.
So fellas could come the Emotional Emancipation Circle as well, right?
I think fellas should come to emotional emancipation circles above all. And one of the questions people always ask is like, why? Why do we need emotional emancipation and these circles? And the answer that we give as trained facilitators is because the lie that I talked about, the lie about Black inferiority and African inferiority, was used to justify a lot of the things that have shaped the societies we live in, right? Whether it was dehumanization, enslavement, colonization, all of these things. And they're still very much with us today. And so, emotional emancipation is really an attitude. It's a way of life that you will learn how to combat all of these things that continue to exist in our own lives, that we as Black people sometimes propagate and continue to give life to. And we learn to identify them and how to deal with them.
I think you spoke to it a little bit already, but you're not a one-man group, and especially in this endeavor. Who are some of the collaborators with this initiative?
Right. So the whole organization that created Emotional Emancipation Circles is based out of the United States, called the Community Healing Network. And a lot of the programs, they partner with other organizations. So, for example, the Emotional Emancipation Circles were created by the Association of Black Psychologists, who would have studied these traumas and these challenges and these issues over time and come up with the best way and methods on how to deal with them. And so we have partnered, the Black Consciousness Festival here out of Trinidad has partnered with the Community Healing Network in order to bring these circles to Trinidad and Tobago.
I think sometimes when you're talking about Black, it's not monolithic, but looking at Black American different from Caribbean, are there nuances particular or peculiar to the Caribbean or Trinbagonian experience more specifically that need to be taken into consideration in situations like this?
Oh, definitely. And we've discussed this with, Community Healing Network a lot. So in the United States and in spaces like Brazil as well, where there is still a European or a white majority in the country, the issues that they have to grapple with and deal with uh, are very different. And there is that nuance there because they are not only dealing with these emotional issues, but they're also dealing with everyday issues, right? Interacting with people who are white in their workplaces, in their schools, and whatnot. And so the kinds of traumas that they will experience, and then the kinds of solutions that they come up with, will be slightly different. It doesn't mean that we can't employ those things here, but however, because we exist in the Caribbean in a majority Black or people of color space, then it's not that the issues don't exist, but how do we then identify them? How do we see the way that they manifest differently in this space? Because they do. It's not that we don't have them. And then how do we kind of twix or tweak the solutions to suit our own context and situation?
We're talking about situation. The situation is thus, Mr. Samad. We have about 3 minutes, and we're going to talk about registration info. We even talk about the dates and how some of these things can be rolled out. And I think there's also one more point that I'll raise after those two issues. Thanks.
Sure. So the circles are based on a method of exploring 7 keys. And so it's an 8 week program because each week you focus on one key. And then in the final week, the 8th week, we kind of do like a wrap up. So it's 7 weeks starting from the 11th of March, which is next week, Monday, and goes until the 6th of May. In terms of registration, we have a small registration fee to cover costs. So it's $400 for the entire program, and you can register either by going to our Facebook page or our Instagram page, which is the Black Consciousness Festival, and there's a link that you can click on to register.
And I also heard there's the opportunity to have some scholarships. There's a limited amount because sometimes the individuals who may need something most have the least access to. So speak to that a little bit, thanks.
Correct. So the scholarships basically are for those people, as you said, who are really interested in the program but maybe facing financial difficulty or just don't have the resources in order to pay the registration fee. They can contact us directly either by email or our telephone number, and just express to us that they would like to apply for the scholarship. And what the scholarship is basically being able to participate in the program for free without having to pay the registration.
All right, now we have about 2 minutes to talk about Raintree Plant and Wellness Center because this is the location, and I think it's also happening 6 to 8 on the Mondays.
That's correct. So 6 to 8 p.m. so people can participate if they're at work or at school, and they can join in after their day has ended. And it's taking place at Raintree Wellness Plant and Wellness Center, which is located in Mukoya. You know, Dike, you've been there. It's a nice natural space. It's fishes and a pond and everything. So it's a kind of space that would also facilitate the healing that we're seeking to do, both emotionally and physically.
But let me, I don't know if it's waxing philosophical, but I am surprised every time I visit because, like I said, industrial estate, you just go and then it is almost as though there's this kind of oasis where you have plants and you have bush and you have all these vibes, and it's really something. So, and I think even the fact that it is a little more on the east side of the east-west corridor is surprising as well. But thank you very much for the work that you're doing and the work that you continue to do, both yourself and the Black Consciousness Festival. Now, on behalf of the entire news team, I'm Dike Rostant. We've been speaking with trained Emotional Emancipation Circle Facilitator Sean Samad. Thank you so much for joining us.